have sufficient evidence to convince myself beyond any reasonable doubt that it didn't happen as per the official version of events. Now there are so many people around the world who are realising, that things aren't normally as presented, and more people understand the template. So I liken it, back in the days of 9/11, 10 years ago, it was like sitting down at a table with a 5,000-piece jigsaw on your own. And I have never yet met anybody who sits down on their own with a 5,000-piece jigsaw and completes it. You start it with the best of intentions and you might go back a few times, but you never actually get to nailing it. But if you've got half a dozen people sitting around the table after lunch one day or whatever, half a dozen people sitting around the table, looking at that 5,000-piece jigsaw, in all probability it'll be finished in 2 or 3 hours. Because different people around the table are looking at different bits, and they're putting in the bits of the jigsaw. Well, that's what's happening now with geopolitical analysis, and that's how we're able to sort of put pieces together. But we have another problem now, and that is that there's deliberate misinformation put in there to try and spoil the plot, as it were. So we have to be very careful, and we have to practice discretion and discernment to sort out what is genuine and what is a complete crop of whatever. And thanks to the work of a guy called Jim Stone, he was the first one to publish his findings, and basically he came up with the observation that, first of all, his first clue that this wasn't perhaps an accident was when he discovered that it was an Israeli security company that had the contract to provide all the surveillance cameras within the Fukushima complex. Now, why an Israeli security company? Well, it was an Israeli security company that had the contract for security in the World Trade Center on 9/11. It was an Israeli security company that had the contract for security all the airports where the planes took off on 9/11. It was an Israeli security company that had the contract on the London Underground and transport to London on 7/7. And once again, we've got an Israeli security company. I mean, any organisation right now that employs an Israeli security company, well, there's a track record. Of course, it's a very incestuous, like all industries, it's very incestuous. But Jim Stone picked up the fact that there were these Israeli-produced and installed cameras inside the reactor at Fukushima. And I think it was reactor number 4, but reactor number 4 was actually due to be decommissioned just 10 days later, on the 25th of 26th of March. And Jim Stone also did the investigation and established that the explosion here actually occurred before the tsunami hit it. I mean, allegedly the meltdown and the subsequent explosion was due to the tsunami hit, not the earthquake. But the actual explosion occurred slightly before. And he makes the observation that only a limited nuclear device could have destroyed the reactor, because these are extremely strong constructions. Is that only a limited nuclear device could have destroyed it in one hit like this. This is the actual photograph in the middle there. That's the photograph of the explosion. That's the photograph of Fukushima exploding that was taken from one of the Israeli perimeter cameras. And he makes the observation, he's putting forward the hypothesis, this is one of the perimeter cameras that you see in the picture there. And he's making the observation that this could quite easily be turned into a directional and limited nuclear device. And what you've got over on the far side there is the picture of a limited nuclear test in Nevada. So when I said that Fukushima may actually give us a clue to what occurred on 9/11, if this was a limited and focused nuclear device, look at the plume there. Just overlay one of the twin towers on top of that. Because we still don't know. We have no idea what turned the towers into dust. Building 7, the third tower to collapse, was a classic controlled demolition. There's absolutely no doubt about that. Right? By the way, have any of you heard of a guy called Danny Shvenko? Danny Shvenko was probably one of the most unlikely 9/11 truthers. He was a controlled demolition expert, a Dutch controlled demolition expert, and he was shown the collapse of Building 7. And he was asked to give his expert opinion on the collapse of Building 7. He wasn't told what it was, he had no idea about 9/11, he'd never investigated it, he was shown the collapse, and when he looked at it, he said, it's brilliant. He said, whoever did that, he said, I must know their name, because this is such a small industry, we all know each other. It's brilliant. He said it's a perfectly executed controlled demolition. And here, this is all video. You'll find this on YouTube. Just Google Danny Jurenko. Anyway, he was then told that it was Building 7 that collapsed on 9/11. And on the video, you can see the shock on his face. He said, well, no, what, really? No, it can't be. He said, yeah. He said, well, it's a controlled demolition. It's brilliant. Perfectly executed. Well, it was a brilliant controlled demolition because the textbook on controlled demolition says that the perfect controlled demolition brings a building down in its footprint, and the pile of rubble is exactly 12.5% the height of the original building, like 1/8 the height of the original building. And Building 7 was exactly that. The pile of rubble was 1/8 the size of the original building. Even though the building was still a working structure, normally a controlled demolition, of course, they're absolutely stripped out of everything. Buildings 1 and 2, which were more than twice the height of Building 7, because they were 110 floors, Buildings 1 and 2, which should have collapsed if it was controlled demolition within its own footprint, but they didn't. There's nothing left. There was nothing left at all. They absolutely disintegrated. So, we have no idea, there's a lot of hypotheses, but we really have no idea what the technology was that absolutely vaporized those buildings, and of course, everything and everyone in them. Well, there has been the hypothesis put forward by a Finnish nuclear physicist for some years that there was a limited nuclear device in the basement of the towers which destroyed the buildings from the inside. So that when the buildings collapsed, it was literally just the outside. And we know that a lot of the ironwork was, again, a controlled demolition because the ironwork has the shaped charges, so that the ironwork, they were cut at 45 degrees, so the ironwork literally just sort of falls down. So anyway, Jim Stone picks that up, and he says, this is a contrived event. So obviously he's pointing the finger here, but we've got to look at why. Why was it a contrived event? Why do we think it was a contrived event? Do you remember what happened a couple of days after Fukushima? Angela Merkel announces that Germany is going to shut down all of its pre-1980 nuclear reactors. So, what was Angela Merkel concerned about? Was Germany going to get hit by a tsunami and have its nuclear reactors potentially wiped out with a tsunami? No. Angela Merkel and the German government were announcing to those of us who follow this material, they were announcing to us that they had cracked immediately what had gone on in Fukushima. And the reason that they announced that they were closing down immediately all pre-1980 nuclear reactors is because the German security services thought that they were going to suffer a similar attack. And I'll explain that in just a second. Then a few days later still, then Germany announced that they were actually going to shut down their entire nuclear industry. So 2 days after the Fukushima disaster, they announced they're going to shut down their pre-1980 nuclear reactors, and now, a few weeks later, they say they're going to shut down all nuclear reactors. Well, back in 2001, this guy, Andreas von Bülow, was the German Minister for Intelligence, I think was his title back then. And in the immediate aftermath of 9/11, von Bülow, who was in the German government, he instructed Lufthansa to ground their entire Boeing fleet. Not just ground the entire Boeing fleet, but strip out all of the Boeing installed hardware and software. What Andreas von Bülow was doing, and he was probably the first 9/11 truther, what Andreas von Bülow was doing was letting it be known that Germany suspected or considered the very real possibility that the aircraft that had crashed into the buildings or whatever in had been hijacked remotely. And what gave him that suspicion was that one of the guys who was one of the signatures to the PNAC document, Project for the New American Century, Dov Zakheim was the comptroller of the Pentagon. It was Dov Zakheim who announced that the Pentagon couldn't account for $2.3 trillion on the day before 9/11. Dov Zakheim was also a main board director of a company called Systems Planning Inc., who developed remote control systems for aircraft. So Von Bülow was basically saying, we know, or we think there's a very good possibility that you did it by remote hijacking, and we're just going to make sure that you can't in any way mess with our planes, and we're going to strip out all of the Boeing hardware. So the German security services are very much on the ball, absolutely on the ball. They are certainly probably amongst the most astute watchers of the deep geopolitical agenda. There you go, this is the map of Germany's nuclear plants, and as you can see, they weren't shutting them down because of tsunami risk in the North Sea or the Baltic. So what was it that got their attention? Well, this is from March the 11th, 2010, exactly 1 year before the tsunami hit and we have the nuclear meltdown. And on that day, 1 year before, the Japanese Foreign Ministry issued a statement by the Press Secretary, Director General for Press and Public Relations, Ministry of Foreign Affairs, on the decision of the government of Israel regarding the construction of housing units and settlements in the West Bank. This is the first time since the Second World War that Japan had openly criticised the Israeli government. Not just criticised, but basically made a very, very specific statement objecting to the Israeli government policy of expanding settlements in the West Bank. That was strike one. Strike one. Strike two, got it here? Strike two, on February the 18th of this year, so a little under 4 weeks before the tsunami, earthquake, nuclear meltdown, the US vetoed the UN draft condemning Israeli settlements. Two of the countries who voted against Israel and the continued development and expansion of West Bank settlements, two of the countries that voted against the Israeli government in that vote were Japan and Germany. And this was the first time since the Second World War that Germany had voted against Israel. Obviously, it's the Holocaust guilt factor. So they always either abstained or voted with Israel. But this time, they voted against the Israeli government. And what's been happening is that, although it hasn't necessarily made it into the main press, more and more countries around the world have basically said, you know what, we're no longer going to support this outrageous, aggressive, Zionist, not Jewish, Zionist agenda. And we're just not going to roll over and be expected to allow them to get away with this stuff. We're going to actually take some real action. So here was Germany and Japan on February the 18th. Then, so this was strike two for Japan, strike two. And then strike three, a few days after this, because Japan's getting a bit cocky now, because they put the announcement out on March the 11th, 2010. They've gone this way on the vote, February the 18th. And then, a few days later, Japan offers to enrich uranium for Iran. Strike three. Strike three. And then on March the 11th, exactly 1 year after the first announcement, bang. So what took out, we're not going to get into the detail of the tsunami, that's a whole different ballgame, but what took out the nuclear reactor? What did Germany suspect took out the nuclear reactor? Germany suspected the Stuxnet virus. A Stuxnet virus is a virus that was developed by Mossad/CIA to specifically target pre-1980 Siemens nuclear control devices. Why had they developed Stuxnet